Today, we're going to talk about comparatives and superlatives. We use these forms when we want to compare people or things. Comparatives are used to compare two people or things, and superlatives are used to say which person or thing is the most extreme in a group of three or more. Let's start with comparatives with short adjectives. When we compare two things, we usually use the comparative form of the adjective plus than. The way we form the comparative depends on how the adjective ends. If the adjective has one syllable and ends in a consonant, we add a. For example, clear becomes clearer. We say, the instructions were much clearer than last time. Another example is rich becoming richer. The businessman's richer than the waiter. If the adjective ends in E, we only add O. For example, wide becomes wider. We say, the Amazon River's wider than the Thames, or safe becomes safer. Luke's a safer driver than Tristan. If the adjective ends in one vowel and one consonant, we usually double the consonant and add er. For example, fit becomes fitter. We say, I'm a lot fitter than I was last year. Other examples are wet becoming wetter and mad becoming madder. If the adjective has two syllables and ends in y, we change the y to I and add e. For example, busy becomes busier, Natia's busier than Pascal, or friendly becomes friendlier, Tristan's friendlier than Luke. With some two-syllable adjectives that don't end in y, we can still use especially with common adjectives like simple or little. For example, the exercise was simpler than I thought, or a mouse is littler than a cat. Now let's move on to superlatives with short adjectives. We use superlatives to say which person or thing is the most in a group. We usually use the plus superlative form. If the adjective has one syllable and ends in a consonant, we add est. For example, clear becomes clearest. We say, please write the instructions in the clearest way possible. Another example is rich becoming richest. The businessman's the richest man in the room. If the adjective ends in e, we add saint. For example, wide becomes widest. The Amazon River is the widest river in the world. Or safe becomes safest. Luke is the safest driver at the office. If the adjective ends in one vowel and one consonant, we double the consonant and add est. For example, fit becomes fittest. We say, Gil's the fittest person at the gym. Other examples are wettest and maddest. If the adjective has two syllables and ends in y, we change y to I and add est. For example, busy becomes busiest. Natia's the busiest person at school, or friendly becomes friendliest. Tristan's the friendliest person at the office. Again, with some two-syllable adjectives that don't end in y, we can still use est, like simple becoming simplest or little becoming littlest. Now let's look at longer adjectives with two or more syllables. With these adjectives, we do not add or est. Instead, we use more for comparatives and the most for superlatives. For example, attractive. George is more attractive than Alan, and George is the most attractive person in the family. Other examples are more comfortable, more dangerous, more popular, and the most useful. We also need to remember some irregular adjectives because they do not follow the normal rules. For example, good becomes better and the best, bad becomes worse and the worst, many becomes more and the most, little becomes less and the least, and far becomes farther or further, and the farthest or the furthest. Now let's look at other ways to compare things. If two things are the same, we use as plus adjective plus as. For example, Madrid's as famous as Barcelona, or Jenny's as tall as Luke. If two things are not the same, we use not as plus adjective plus as. For example, Barcelona's not as famous as Madrid, or chicken's not as good as beef. Finally, let's connect this grammar with some vocabulary about appearance. We can compare people using adjectives like tall, young, beautiful, handsome, slim, strong, or good-looking. For example, she's younger than her sister, or he's the most handsome man in the room. We can also describe hair with adjectives like blonde, black, straight, or curly. So, to finish, remember this. Think about how many syllables the adjective has, follow the rules carefully, and don't mix forms like more smaller. If you use the correct structure, comparatives and superlatives are a very powerful way to describe and compare people and things.